Good morning. If you're a single mom with children, you've got a problem. 9-year-olds can't pay for their moms. Moms can't take care of their kids and uh, get a income, go out and work. And so you're wondering why you're in such dire straits. Well, it's not going to work out. That's where home economics comes in. Home economics is when the married couple is viewed as a basic economic brick. And you start with an 1950s American house, and you go off to the side and start with farming and mining and manufacturing and wholesale, retail, and repair and all sorts of things. Then you ask the gal how many oranges she wants. Now you know how many orange trees to plant to get everybody out of poverty and into plenty. This home economics. That's the stuff that works so well, and that's the stuff that gave everybody such a huge middle class. And they threw all that out. They threw all that out in the 70s. In the 1950s, they said they would, the Communist Party said they would overthrow the United States by about the year 1973. And they were pretty accurate. They did just that. There was a huge change in our society then, and that's when you have to go back to. And so I was hoping that I could get gals, among other groups, gals too, who have children, to chime in and start start saying how much of a budget they would need. First off, how much of a budget do they have now? What are their expenses? And then how much of a budget would they need if they were living a life right out of the 1950s? If they had a husband and 2.2 children to take care of, how much, and on a 3-bedroom brick house, how much of an income would they need for groceries and shoes and food? And also consuming. The same people in this world, the same people that do the producing, do the consuming. And so you include a trip to Disneyland once a year and recreational tennis and that sort of thing. That world was completely thrown out in favor of cashing in on it all, in favor of a peasant and property class society. And they did it, it worked, and now we have a small group of incredibly wealthy people who do all the consuming, and then there's a huge gap, and then there's a large group of people who live in poverty, as, just like all the other countries. Just like all the other countries, including the communist countries. You don't really realize it, but in the communist countries, they say everything for the state. And the implication is everything for the people living in that country. No, it doesn't work that way. It works the same way as what you think of when you think of American slavery. There's this huge, beautiful mansion. Then there's all these people living in the slave quarters, in the housing projects, or apartments. It doesn't make any difference what you call them. And they do all the work, and the people in the big house do all the consuming. And everything is for the people that live in the big house. Everything is for the state. And it works. And they got away with it. They have people rioting in the streets to bring communism to the United States. And they did an awfully good job. And now people like you are living in poverty because of it. You've got to do something. And so if we could just get people to start joining our little group, and we'd have an idea of what you need as far as a budget. If you can do that, and then you ask the guys how many hours they work. In my school days, it was always the poor plumber. You pick on the plumber. How much does a plumber make? And any of those guys, a plumber, a guy who drives a forklift, the average Joe, and you ask him how many hours he works. I guarantee you it'll be more than 40. I guarantee you it'll be more than 80. I guarantee you it'll probably be about twice that. And once you have those two numbers, then you can start to do something about it. Without sounding too political, this is all political. Remember, Donald Trump ran not so much as a Republican. He used to be a Democrat and he became a Republican. Donald Trump ran standing up to a bum's rush. And so we've got to hold him to that. And I'm sure we can. We have to do our part. Otherwise, nothing's going to happen. They won't be able to accomplish anything. And so it becomes a 4-stage process. The first stage is you teach a fellow a sense of original sin, and you make a value judgment back to the classic definition of good and evil. In our little world, the priest and the pimp, where the priest is on one side and he says, say what you mean and mean what you say, everything else comes from the evil one. And then on the other side is a pimp, and he knows how to manipulate and intimidate people. Those are the guys who won. To get a little more philosophical, they threw out those 3 things that make up God and country: straightening out our emotions, willing the good of another person, and then doing it because because Christ rose on the 3rd day. The real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, and that sort of thing, they would say. And it turns out all that stuff means something. What it means is, they would do things like get into a duplex and start renting property out to other people, let other people start to pay their mortgage. And what happened is the people that were in the bottom of that middle class fell out of middle class, and they started to become a class of peasantry. And it grows. It's called the lazy V. Looks like the V, just like this. And there's good reason for it. And after a while, a few decades, those people live in the foothills, and they're doing very well, and you're starving. There's another catch to that sort of thing. It involves an attitude. You can't do it and not be a scoundrel. There are certain things in life you can't do and not be what traditionally is called malice. And so you take into account a sense of original sin. So I hope somebody's listening to this. I hope you gals start to chime in, and take time out and tell us what you think. Excuse me, I'm going to. There we go. I'll do a little accounting there. So if you would please, if you would take time out and tell us you're going to be an American citizen, a sort of a professional person. It goes against nature, taking into account a sense of original sin, and those sorts of things go against nature. And then you're a good person. Then you're a good wife to a husband, and a good husband to wife, and then you're a good mother. And that stuff has meaning behind it. And then if you're going to raise children, then you're a common housewife. You have to have a house to live in. And that's where things spill into economics. We don't have a house anymore, at least a house intentionally designed that way. We have people who live in the foothills and put you and I into apartments and housing projects, which is the history of most societies in the history of human beings on this earth. Excuse me. And so if you would call in, and it's up to you to start being bossy. In this society, in a God and country society, the society is made up of the summation of family units. And so there's this famous philosophical thing. If you want to be free, you have to be a servant. And so if you're a servant, then suddenly it's your opinion, and we're all in the same group. The other way is when there's a small group of people and they live in the plantation, and they'll say things like, you're your own person, aren't you? So have individual rights. And it turns out those individual rights are anything but, and things are a bit backwards that way. Excuse me, I'm going to take a sip. I put a messages on some of the Facebook groups, the ones that said, I'm a mom and I need help. And so I'm hoping you'll be among those, a professional mom, and call in and start telling us what to do. They used to have, at the university, they would have a college of home economics. And there were gals that would get PhDs in this stuff, and they would sit around and try and do things the scientific method, raise children the scientific method. And it was working. In the 1950s, after the World War II in the United States, our standard of living was so high that people who come from other countries didn't have a perception of it. One of them was the head of the Soviet Union, the head of Russia, the head of Russia is supposed to be the head of the Soviet Union. I can't think of his name. And he came over on a tour in the 50s and 60s. And he saw there was a couple things that he just couldn't comprehend. Remember, communism is the prima donna intellectual government. You go to the universities and they all want to be communists. And then you realize they all want to be in the front office. I've been around I've heard a few years now, and I've heard an awful lot of speeches. And not once have I ever heard anybody give a speech that was favorable to actually working in a communist factory. I've heard an awful lot of speeches about how good communism is from the point of view of being management. I drifted a bit, so you have to excuse me. The head honcho from the Soviet Union came over in the 50s. And one of the things that he couldn't comprehend was the size of the parking lots at the Ford Motor plant. The idea that people who worked at the plant actually drove cars to the plant, it never occurred to him. The idea that the same people who do the producing do the consuming. And it just wasn't in their realm. Another one is the starter house. It was quite common for a young girl and a young man who was starting out in life. And he would get a job as an apprentice plumber or some such thing. And they would get married and they would get into a starter house. And that idea is completely gone. It wasn't in the thinking of people who lived in Europe, no less people lived in communist countries or Mexico or any of the other places. You notice they did away with that. The communists in the 1950s said they would do away with, they would take over the United States by about the year 1973. They were very accurate about that. There was a revolution. They did go from the idea of home economics, of making money by putting you in your own business, willing the good of another person, having the leadership style of washing the feet of the apostles, and it turns into home economics. It turns into a huge middle class. By now, if you were a young girl, you wouldn't have any problems. It should all fit. It should all just happen to click in that hubby made enough money for you to buy the groceries and the furnishings and the school tuition and the trip to Disneyland and those sorts of things. And that world was completely thrown out. That world was thrown out. It was a choice from groups like the Women's Liberation Movement to either get onto a maintenance level, which is a very important concept, or to cash in on it all. They chose to cash in on it all. We have a bunch of anecdotes around here. We've had them for half a dozen years now. There's about 3 dozen anecdotes in the YouTube channel and 2 of them and Facebook. I forgot my thought. Yeah, well, I forgot my thought, so oh, excuse me, I just remembered. Among them, or at least here in Tucson, I put some effort into try and figure out if you were a single gal, what would your budget be and what were your expenses? And we started with a secretary, which is cheating a bit because the secretary is a trained, um, educated character, trained. And they started out at 45, about 40, they made about 45,000 a year. They averaged about that. That's an incredible sum of money. And they ended up with about $3,000 disposable income after taxes. And then they started adding things up. It was about $1,600 for a very not very nice apartment, and about between $900 and $1,000 a year for daycare to get somebody else to raise your child, and groceries and medical care and dental care and the expenses that goes with that, the deductibles, food. The budget left was so quickly went way above the 45, the disposable income, that it was ridiculous. They don't even have a chance to have any kind of recreation. If you add up the amount of hours, you would have to come home, pick up your child, and then if they're a toddler, they're going to get up in the middle of the night, and you have no sleep, and you wonder why you're out of sorts. There's good reason for it. They threw out those three very philosophical things. The truth of the truth, which is a famous philosophical. The decent of the decent, which is another one. The idea that you would make money it translates into making money by making somebody else better off. A good example would be these fast food franchises. You would go to college and you might get a business degree, and you might find somebody who has a bachelor's degree in culinary arts, and you might get an architect and a lawyer, and you would come up with a franchise, excuse me, and you would put that average Joe, you and I, who would go to, say, chef school, and you would say, hey, get into my franchise, your hamburger franchise, your pizza franchise. It would be an owner-operator thing. And you would be told you can't do certain things. You can't hire teenagers. You got to give teenagers a chance to grow up around here. In the 70s, one of the things the person you're listening to did have a stereotypical do-gooder degree. And after I graduated, something wasn't right, so I went back. And among the things I did was I would just enroll in classes and pretend I was and just try and hang out with the professors, trying to find out what they thought. It was a thing. I took a handful of classes in the physics department. Don't ask me if I ever passed any of them, but I learned a few things. And one of them was that physicists have no emotional training. And so when you hear them talk about God exists or God doesn't exist, just completely ignore them. They don't have a right to claim expertise in this stuff. And they do the same thing everyone else does. They fashion themselves in charge, and they fashion you living in either an apartment or a housing complex. And the idea of making money by putting you in your own business, it just escapes them. There are, by the way, Catholic priests who are physicists, and they had a completely different demeanor. This is the University of Arizona here in Tucson, and it turns out the Vatican has a telescope here at the University of Arizona. And so you could just see a blatant difference between the demeanor of a Catholic priest and the other guys that you see on YouTube, the ones that fashion themselves intellectuals. I drifted a bit, but I'm going back to the 70s to make the point. The university professors were very big on getting together and investing in fast food franchises. And they threw out the whole idea of putting you in your own business, and they wouldn't think twice about hiring teenagers. And they were reinstitutionalizing teenagers back in the workplace. They'd work you for about 6 hours a day and never more than, I think, 20 or 30 hours a week. Because if you worked one more hour, they would have to pay you they'd have to pay Uncle Sam things like unemployment and that sort of stuff, unemployment insurance and health insurance, and they wouldn't do it. In other words, they were horrible at it. And the whole idea of fast food franchises, when they first exploded, there was an explosion of these things in the 70s, right when society was changing. The whole idea was to make money for them, and there are parameters of competition, and they constantly caused other people to plunge into poverty. They couldn't have cared less. And so when you see these guys protesting, they want a raise in the fast food franchises, a raise in minimum wage, you have to take a step back and say, no, that's completely wrong. You stop what you're doing. You go find those university professors, the one that caused all this poverty, the one that changed our society, and you take it away from them. Then you go back over here and you find some guy who's a chef, and you have an owner-operator franchise. And they've gone full circle. They've gone from institutionalizing teenagers and working them part-time until they burn out to a professional. You work at a fast food place for a living. No, you can't do that. It's completely wrong. It's a completely different society. You're caught up in that. There's no way you're going to be able to live and have a child and have everything work out. You're going to end up on the street. Unless your parents or grandparents got into golden real estate in the 70s, in which case you're in the upper class and you have all these other people producing things for you. Well, it's been closing in on a half hour, and so I'm going to cut this off. We have our little story, The Priest and the Pimp, which represents a classic battle of good and evil. There's a sense of original sin. Forgive me for this, both the Catholic and the communist define mental illness as the normal taken into the abnormal, from a cold to the flu to pneumonia. The Catholics turn around and say, go backwards. Go back from pneumonia to the flu to a cold. And then normal is normal, but not good enough. You sit in a chair, close your eyes, fantasize about the gals until you become sexually aroused. Open your eyes, look around, and do it again. Only this time the young man is trying to get the gal pregnant. And you realize that's not a natural thing at all. And he'll see a sense of original sin with a snap of a finger. This spills over into the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, and those guys throwing out the idea that a human being normal is not a natural thing, and they just threw it out. They did all those things back then, and it's affecting us now. And so I hope you'll pass the word. We'll try and do this next week. I hope you'll hear this and then turn around, and if you can, or if this isn't a good time for you, call in and tell me what a good time is. And what we need from you is to be sort of very much a professional person. How much of a budget do you need? What's the mortgage? You don't rent property here. You don't rent property to people. You don't rent property from people. So how much is a mortgage? What's clothes? What's the budget? What's a couch or a couple of recliner chairs? That sort of thing. If you had to open up shop, how much money would you need? And if you're a guy, how many hours do you work? If you know a guy, have him tune in, and if we get those two things, Uh, how much of a budget do you need? It would have to be you personally. If you're in St. Louis or Boston or LA. And then if you're a guy, how many hours would you have to work at the job you have? And you can do that, then you can do something about it. Actually, we have a plan here. We know exactly what's wrong, exactly what to do about it, and exactly how to do it. And first step is you. So I hope you'll hear this and tune in. Okay, thank you very much. Bye. Okay, as soon as I figure out how to stop this.